Blog Talk Radio. Welcome, everyone, to the Dark Matters radio show with the Sorceress Cagliastro, blood sorceress, pioneer, and necromancer in the hands of 9, for a discussion on all topics relating to blood sorcery, necromancy, the science of sorcery, and related work of manipulation of energy. Each week, the Sorceress Cagliastro and Chris Ostrowski will explore topics designed to explore sorcery on a more profound level. Tonight's topic is a discussion on power of heritage and power of place. How do these two things affect your work and you? We'll explore. And we also have our special guest joining us again for tonight, Victor Furman. Victor is an interfaith minister, spiritual channel, author, and paranormal investigator who is currently on 2 investigation teams in New York. And join us in the Dark Matters chat room, which is located under the Blog Talk Radio media player for this show. And now, here's the Sorceress Cagliastro and Chris Ostrowski.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you for bringing us in. Hello, Chris. Hello, Victor. How is everyone this evening?
How are you?
Good evening. Good evening.
Victor, thank you for joining us in this late night time slot. I appreciate that. It has been my choice to go to 11 o'clock for the rest of the summer. More people are listening to this show currently in archive than they are in live play, which is fine. That is the nature of the experience. And I think the material lends itself to a later slot as well. Tonight we're talking about power of place and power of heritage, and I want to first point out that for me those things are not necessarily always related, and that through our discussion tonight we'll talk about the strengths of one, strengths of the other, and how for some people they are relevant together. And I'd like to just open this show with talking for a moment about when I first went to Scotland and put my foot down on the soil there. And being a person of Sicilian heritage, thinking that this was going to be sort of an interesting experience and feeling a place that, I mean, I had been to the UK before, but I had not been to Scotland, and thinking that this might be just an interesting moment, or even longer than that, but that it would just be that, and I would enjoy that. That's not what happened. Somehow I connected with that place in a profound way. And I think if you went back to all the way in time to the point where, you know, my relatives were one-celled animals, there's no Scottish blood in me. And that is the precedent, or at least the platform at which I want to start this experience tonight, is because I've had that incredible experience of touching down in a place that has affected me profoundly, of which I consider home. And for me, there is no heritage connected to that. Anybody want to take it from here? Victor? Chris? Whoever?
Chris, go ahead, Chris.
Well, I was born in the middle of Pennsylvania Dutch country. So there's a lot of things around here that has to do back to the old country, over to Germany and all that. The biggest thing here is powwow medicine, which I practice. I have German blood in me. Matter of fact, I'm more German than what I am anything. But I also have Polish in me, and that goes back to my ancestors hung out of trees and stole horses. You know, it just. There is.
Are you still doing that, Chris? We just want to know if you're still doing that. You're still doing that.
Not at the moment. I'm not.
Not while you're on the air. Well, that's good to know.
No.
Wanted to be sure.
But there was talk that my great grandmother was a gypsy. So I kind of have it like in the. I'm not sure if it's 100%. We don't have any documentation. But between that and what I've learned from my Pennsylvania Dutch side of the family, I took up doing powwow medicine. And I said, in this area, that it's just the hot spot for it. Everybody denies it, that it exists, but it does, and everybody knows it does. There's also a lot of Russians that settled here at one time. It's now getting an influx of people that practice Santeria and voodoo and all that. So the energy here is just incredible. And
Chris, I just want to add to that, just for a moment. I just want to jump in and say that I have read the term haunted, which is not a term I'm comfortable with, but for a common colloquialism, that Pennsylvania is considered the most haunted place in America. And I wonder sometimes why people think that. I mean, where does that come from?
Well, a lot of it comes from, of course, Gettysburg. I mean, nobody comes to PA from out of state without going to Gettysburg. Then you have Philadelphia. You had a lot of mining towns around here. And, with mining comes accidents. In this area, Charlie Adams, who's a writer about most of the ghosts and things in Pennsylvania and Berks County, which I'm living in, he brought a lot of this to light. I don't know so much if it's that we're more haunted than everybody else, that we're just more publicized than everybody else.
That very well might be the case, and the influx of people from different places is a very interesting thing. Power of place and power of heritage is sometimes a mobile experience, and that's what I was getting to with my brief introduction of how it feels to me when I am in Scotland. I think that at this point, I've been doing this for decades, and this is my life's work, and I would have it no other way, being in service to the disincarnate and being able to have the honor of sharing the material with people who want to learn it. In that experience, I've become a relatively mobile person, in so much as where I go is where I am, and where I am is where I bring myself. And in that sense, I find that, for me, power of place has become sort of centralized in my own sense of my own blood. Not something I really intended to mention tonight, but I feel like it's important to, if we're going to really look at what power of place might be, then let's look at all of the possible facets of that. Hang on a second, because I know that Victor had a story he wanted to share with us. Victor, do you want to jump in with that?
Actually, my share will come along with power of heritage, but I do have a share on power of place. I was born in Brooklyn. New York. My family, my grandparents on my father's side, came over from Austria and Germany in the late 1800s, settled in Brooklyn. My mother's family also was Brooklyn and Queens, New York. And so I'm, in terms of my blood heritage, it's New York, from Europe and into New York. And I've traveled many places around the world, but I have to say, and I don't want people to get the wrong impression from this, because a lot of people will think that this is a place that a lot of people feel a connection to. But through a number of synchronicities, I spent several trips to Sedona, Arizona. The entire state of Arizona I felt very connected, no matter where I was, between Phoenix and all the way north to the Grand Canyon. But I actually felt that Sedona, I had been born in Sedona, and obviously I wasn't born in Sedona. But that was the energy that I felt. I felt a deep, abiding connection to that place. Had many friends that I learned lived there, and I got to see them and meet them. And the interesting thing is, the majority of the friends that I met, these were young people, are all now disincarnate. So I'm not sure what the connection is with that, but these were all amazing folks that I had the opportunity of sharing time with in that area. And the energy and the majesty of the place to me is just amazing.
Victor, let me ask you a question. Did you know much about Sedona before you went?
Only brief snippets from people about how the vortexes were there and the red rocks and how beautiful it was. And really didn't go there with any preconceived notion. I'm the kind of person who likes to go and discover for myself. And what I discovered there in terms of energy was just amazing.
This is such a huge topic, and I would like to actually consider doing more than one show on it, not in a row, but more than one show, because this is really so multifaceted. It's the power of place, where you're standing where you are, and what you must make out of that as a person doing sorcery, which is even like a fifth or sixth facet of the thing. Because, I've moved around a lot, and my family and I have been not nomadic in the sense that we don't have a home, but we like to explore different opportunities, and we've lived in different states and different countries, and, that sort of thing. where my daughter has had the opportunity to walk into schools of people with different heritage and step right in. She's really amazing at that. But the other side of this is that as a sorcerer, one has to do work where one is. And I think as we move forward in these shows and we start to talk about something that actually Darren and I are looking at, which is a broader scope of how to travel while doing the work and using the boxes. But what do you do when you are somewhere uncomfortable and you don't feel the power of place and you want to get into some work there? I mean, for me, I reach for my blood. That's what I do, because what I was saying is that I have become sort of the mobile power of place for myself, but with years and years of honing the skill. Chris, what do you think about that?
I agree the same way, that you have to be able to pull it out of yourself. You can't rely on, well, we said this before, you can't rely on external things. You know, we just do too much of this, and it becomes to the point where if you're going to be good, you have to do it out of the box. You can't just sit there and say, okay, I have to be here. I can't always be here, because where I need to be might be someplace else. So it falls back on me. I'm the one that has to do it. I have to pull it in. I have to be the battery, so to speak.
Right, of course.
If I need any extra energy, whatever, we've also said before, there's always something. I mean, how many people die every day? There is that external energy. You've talked about the blood of the martyrs.
Right. My new fascination. Yes.
So you have to be able to pull that in too. We can't draw things in. Now, it doesn't make us, turn us into Superman or anything, but
we can adapt.
We can adapt to our situation. We have to. If we can't rely on ourselves, what can we rely on? It's like being lost in the woods. If you get lost in the woods, you only have one thing, and that's yourself. It's the same way if we move outside of our comfort zone.
Let me ask you. Go ahead.
We just have to be able to do it. We have to train ourselves that we are the energy source and we pull everything in. We make the power.
I want to talk for a second about the concept of an altar. And I know that might not seem like it absolutely fits into this, but I have something to say about this. Power of place. This concept of an altar, to me an altar is a place where I keep my materials that I'm likely to use. And it's always a wonderful shambles of this and that and, iron and magnets and all manner of things. And it's a very, it certainly doesn't have a warm and fuzzy look, let's just say that. However, it's not always with me. And it's not even necessarily always in my home. I keep things where I keep them. And this idea that one has to stand in front of one's altar and produce some sort of sorcery event or whatever kind of magic that you feel you want to practice or whatever path that you follow, the point is that this concept of altar and place and all that has to take root in the self to truly be able to do this kind of thing. I talk about when I'm teaching quite a bit about standing somewhere, in Times Square or anywhere in the world and in the woods, it doesn't matter, and something is occurring where you must address it with sorcery in real time, because those of us, Chris is familiar with this experience, those of us who've been doing this for decades are able to just pull it out of the air when we need it, because it's really not coming out of the air, it's coming from the self. So wherever you are is the power of the place that you need to be. And I thought tonight, when we were going to talk about places in particular where we feel particularly powerful, which is very vital, because it certainly does refill the battery when we're there. But what is the power of place? Are we the power of place? Are we the how does our heritage play into this? Chris, we talk about blood a lot. And today I was working on a wonderful piece of. I have this beautiful faceted crystal thing that Gina, one of the students, actually sent to me, and it's a wonderful, wonderful, beautiful faceted thing, and it has enormous amount of light that hits it, and it's very heavy and sort of rich. And I keep it in my hand, in my left hand a lot, and I move it around in my hand, without touching it, as I do, and it rolls around and all sorts of things. And today I was showing that to my husband, and we were talking about how I move things in my hands in this way, same way that I flip magnets and all that kind of thing. And I said to him, well, because it's where it is, it's where it's placed. I am able to move and sort of bubble and wave the blood under the palm of my hand, so things flip around because the blood pushes it around. So I was thinking about the power of place of that stone in my hand and what it was experiencing and how it feels to be the carrier of blood sorcery. And I want to talk to you about that for a second, Chris, and then, Victor, if you want to talk about heritage, that would be great. So, Chris, how does blood play in for you in your work?
Well, as far as my work goes, I don't use the basis for powwow medicine it's based in Christianity on one side, and then there's another form of it that's based in the old Norse gods. Mm-hmm. I don't use any of that because that's not a thing for me. I don't use gods, deities, all that stuff. So it's got to come from me. Everything that I do, whether I'm working with herbs or I'm doing laying on of hands or something like that, that energy's got to come from me. It's got to be my blood that makes that happen, because I don't look for anything on the external. I don't look to a god. I don't look to anything else, so it's got to come out of me. I got to feel it in my hands. I got to get it radiating from the center of my chest is where it comes from, which you know that.
Oh, yeah.
And I just pull it out to the extremities. I force everything out to my hands. That's how I use it to create things. Well, not create, but how I can move things around in a patient, like if there's a blockage or there's some kind of infection or something like that, and I'm using herbs. I can put that into it and make it a little bit more potent than what it is. Just the whole thing of...
Now, the sense of power of place, I want to ask you this question, the sense of power of place. Where you are now in this place that you live in your life, the physical location, does that enhance what you're doing? Does it diminish it? Or have you gotten to that mobile kind of place, too, where it's not as relevant at the moment?
Well, the weirdest thing is when I was down, I lived in Lancaster, which is just down the road about a half an hour, for about 5 years. And when I moved back, I could tell a difference in the way things were, the way I felt. I ain't saying it enhanced anything, but I could tell I was in a different area. And I think it's because of a lot of this area, we have a lot of underground water. I think the water has something to do with what I feel, because some of that runs parallel to the ley lines here, and ley lines are the energy from the earth. So I think where I'm at, I pick up on things like that, and I notice a difference here.
It's very interesting.
Absolutely.
Well, Victor, you have some thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's interesting what Chris was just saying, because I find the same thing happens in areas where there are large limestone deposits. We find that a lot along the Hudson River areas here in upstate New York, built on limestone. And the amount of energy, the enhancement of the energy, it's like getting an extra battery put into a circuit when I do any work up there. But getting back to what Chris was saying, I got involved in energy healing and energy work in the late 80s, formally, because I'd been doing something of this nature all my life, but I took formality to it in the late 80s with the practice of Reiki and then other things after that. And in the initial formality, they gave you a series of steps and procedures that you would follow, and a ritual that you would follow. But as I matured in the work and the energy, what I learned was all I needed was my intention. And if it was my intention to do the work at a specific time, that's it. That was the automatic switch that turned everything on for me. And no matter where I was, just switching that intention on was the secret, was the answer. And so that's my takeaway from this entire experience. The only place that I ever felt some type of quantum enhancement as I mentioned before, with Sedona. For some reason, be it the nature of the place, be it the history of the place, be it the fact that many people of common interest are there with common energy that perhaps we're tapping on each other. I can't explain it, but it was a quantum leap of that specific energy. But again, any place else I go, it's within me. I flip my intention. I don't need any special, anything special except my intention to do the work that I want to do.
You know, I think that this idea that we are our own power of place is new. And it's new in so much that no one talks about it. And, you know, the brilliance of the kinds of work that I do in the science of sorcery is that if you think of the ego as that which is just pure and true and speaking back to you, then it's very ego-driven. And it speaks to the truth of where we are because it's science, and it doesn't really have to prove itself in any kind of esoteric way because we allow for it to prove itself in its factual way through experiments and data and this sort of thing. And I find that there are places occasionally where I feel less connected to the place and have to use the skills that I have to pull away from it so that I can really produce the kind of sorcery that I desire to produce. And that can be anywhere, you know, it can be somewhere local, it can be somewhere I've traveled to, that kind of thing. But I do find that happens. Mary, I think, is going off the air for a minute, so I was just going to ask her a question, but she seems to be going off the air for a moment. So I want to ask you, Victor, do you feel that where you come from, and I'm very familiar with where you were born, obviously, do you feel like that comes with you in a sense, that the place has affected you? And you know, this term affected is an interesting one because in modern times that often means a negative, has a negative connotation, and for me it certainly does not. You know, when something has affected you, it could be in a wonderful way. Do you feel like coming from a place that busy, that varied, that wonderful, that rich, that urban has affected you?
You know, the funny thing is that I can be in a subway car, and I can be amongst hundreds of people in a park or on a sidewalk, and I'm in tune with what I bring with me, and I'm not. I can meditate walking down Fifth Avenue amongst hundreds of people. So, and that's just me. I'm not saying that everyone can do that. It's just my nature, my personality, my energy. I actually feel that there are areas of the city that I feel very relaxed and comfortable in, including places where there are large numbers of people. I can go into Central Park or Prospect Park on a Saturday with tons of people bicycle riding, walking dogs, playing sports, doing all types of activities, and I feel a sense of joy. Mm-hmm. So, a trained New Yorker, I don't know if it's a training. Sorceress just commented on our little message board here, a trained New Yorker. I don't know about training. I think it's just someone who's grown up in the city my entire life, having gone to school here and everything else, and just being part of that energy is second nature to me. What I do find, though, is where I go to places of solitude. For example, on my vacation, I went to the coast of California, and I found a really different kind of a sense of peace and relaxation there. But, you take with you, the old story is wherever you go, there you are. And literally,
I love that.
You are there. Yeah. That's
you know why I wrote trained New Yorker, Victor, because I am also a trained New Yorker. And and the sense that you said you could be in the subway, you could be in Central Park. I mean, I went right back there when you mentioned those things. I've been on the subway with 1,000 people, and I'm thinking, oh, I'm so lonely, I'm so bored. And here you are, with 1,000 people and 10,000 stories, and you're like that. And then, when I go to areas that are really rural or not as involved with that kind of urban experience, people are sort of a little more clingy to each other. They want to hear your story. They want to talk to you. The other day, my daughter and I were somewhere where somebody just immediately helped us and lifted something up for us. And I sort of chuckled to myself. And Magdalene said to me, "Oh well, if that was New York, you could go either way. Somebody would help you, or they would just enjoy ignoring you." And it's that sense of being able to find yourself in the chaos, which an urban environment causes. And I think it's a wonderful thing to take with you. I think it's a wonderful way to be in this world, is to be able to function in your mind and in your mental sort of solitary moments, no matter where you are. And I think coming from an urban setting, that might actually be helpful. Now, Chris, I know that you are in Pennsylvania, but did you grow up in a rural kind of place, or did you grow up more like in a city environment?
No, this was a city environment. Granted, it's not like New York City, but it's, say a second-class city, urban. I mean, I went to public school, the whole 9 yards. My uncle worked in a tannery. I had relatives worked in a steel mill. It's that kind of city. And I learned at a very young age to, just block people off, to make myself fall into the woodwork. And I think that helps me now when when you guys were talking about walking down the street and nobody sees you. Nobody, you can be in your own little world and just walk and concentrate on what you're doing. I think I picked that up at a young age to do that, just for the simple fact that I didn't want people to see me. My childhood wasn't the greatest, and we're not getting into that. But
that's a different show, Chris.
Right. So I picked that up early, and I kind of understand what Victor's saying about being almost like in your own little bubble while you're walking down the street. And I think we can do that. It just comes natural to us. Same way when we walk into a room, people look at us if we want it that way.
Right.
We can make a grand entrance, or we could sneak in and nobody knows we're there. And that has to do with the power that's within you. That has to do, you're creating the space. You're creating the moment. It's you that's doing this.
Victor, you have feedback on that?
I'm hearing that lyric from that old Cream song in my head. There was a song by Cream called "I Feel Free," and Jack Bruce writes, "I can walk down the street, but there's no one, and there's no one there, and I can walk down the street, and there's no one there, but the pavement is one huge crowd. I can drive down the road, my eyes don't see what my mind wants to cry out loud." I don't know, just forget. I get into 60s and 70s lyrics. Forgive me.
Well, I will tell you certainly do have a command of 60s and 70s lyrics, and I quite enjoy it.
Well, thank you.
I don't know. I can't speak for anybody else, but I quite enjoy it. I wanted to ask a question about certain types of power of place. Now, I am a necromancer. I deal quite a bit with the disincarnate. And I would say that, as I always say, I am in service to the disincarnate. And for me, that is the baseline of what it is that I do. So let's talk about what the power of place when it comes to things like cemeteries is. Because, when I pick my daughter up at school, there's a cemetery nearby. I'm often there early and just enjoying that experience. And then when we drive through, I say things to her like, well, not that I really need to say it to her anymore, but if there's anyone else with us, I say, let's not talk about our chaos here. Let's be here, and let's have respect for where we are. And yes, that is perhaps another show to talk about the respect that I have for the disincarnate and that this entire crew here does. But what about when you're standing in a cemetery? What is the protocol? What do you think is necessary? Mary, do you have any thoughts on that?
It's funny, when we started talking about cemeteries, I thought about when I visited the cemeteries in New Orleans, and some of the different things that I was taught. To go into the cemetery, you had to knock, and to be in there and just to be respectful, whether it was a pauper cemetery or whether it was one of the more well-known cemeteries in New Orleans. You still entered it with a certain reverence and a certain way of acting and being. And I think that's just really important. I don't know if everybody realizes that when they go into cemeteries, how you enter and how you exit with that reverence. But it's definitely a different experience going into a cemetery here, and where I live in Boston, and going into a cemetery in New Orleans. It has a different feel to it.
Well, when you go to a cemetery in Sicily, you are often met with visible remains. And this kind of thing is not so unusual as people would like to think it is. And, you go into places like the Confucian catacombs where the bodies are all laying there, and you're confronted with that. So this is an interesting extreme, of course, and when it comes to power of place. When you walk into a room where there's individuals who are in a state of mummification and their remains are, and they're sitting right there in front of you. So there's such a vast chasm between that and walking on the ground with neatly tailored headstones. But the point is that either one of those places are places that are marked by the experience of an individual who has become a member of the disincarnate. So when you're in that place, and there's an ancient cemetery here that I frequent now. It's not as ancient as the ones in Europe, of course, but it's quite old. And I find myself in this place, and I say, first of all, that I'm extraordinarily honored, as I often am when people want to study the work or when they want to talk to me about their disincarnate. But in a place like a cemetery, there is a sense of extraordinary exchange. That's the word that I want to look for, exchange. And when I'm there, I know that they're right there, and for me they're right there most of the time, but right there because they're there visiting, waiting, hoping to see people come in and have exchanges with them, and it seems like a place where the dead are actually quite active. So in a place like that, one has to look at how one is and how one produces sorcery in those moments, and is it respectful? There's a house that I'm looking at on and off, and it's here, and it's an old funeral home, and the location is not great, but the space is amazing. And when I go in and see it, and we're thinking about what we want to do about it, it has not been used for years and years and years. But the embalming room is still intact in the basement. And all the fixtures are there on the wall, pipes, and the drainage holes are on the floor, and all of this is still quite visible. And there's a lift, an awful old dark lift that goes from the embalming room up to the first floor and to the second floor where the viewing rooms were, which if I choose to own this thing, then it will be living room, not viewing room. So in that place, I find that my family is very reverent, which is one of the problems of being there. You can almost not be yourself. So I'm curious as to experiences that you feel are relevant when it comes to being in places where the dead are. I mean, Victor, do you have any thoughts on that?
Interesting. As I've mentioned on this program and elsewhere before, my grandparents on my father's side were observant Jews. And in observant or Orthodox Judaism, you are prohibited from being in the presence of the body, of the disincarnate, unless it's your direct blood relative, being mother, father, sister, brother, or husband or wife. You're not supposed to be in the presence of the body if it's someone beyond the boundaries of that immediate family. So, for example, if you go to a funeral home and it is not one of those members, you're supposed to sit outside of the sitting room. You're not supposed to be in that room because it's considered in Orthodox Judaism, and I don't subscribe to this, but it's considered to be unclean. As is approaching a cemetery, where if you are not attending the funeral of one of those immediate members, you're supposed to stand off to the side of the road and not cross any of the existing grave areas. So this is something that I was raised with and brought up. With that being said, my grandfather, who I mentioned was a Kabbalist and a very, very mystical and spiritual man, told me that whenever I go into the presence of the deceased or the disincarnate, to do it with great respect, to always ask permission when walking on any type of land which is considered to be sacred land before even stepping over the threshold of the land, standing there silently, meditating with gratitude and asking for permission to enter, which was an amazing thing for him to tell me as a 5-year-old child, for this man to tell me, and something that has stuck with me my entire life, and which gave me a sense of reverence and respect. Wherever I go, that's an area that's considered to be a sacred space.
You know, I love this comment that you made about Orthodoxy and their rules about this sort of thing. Because as a Sicilian person, I will tell you that there is a similar effect when when you're at a wake, for example, of an individual who's Sicilian and has become disincarnate, that front row where people sit is not to be gone near unless you are shaking the hand of or showing some sort of acknowledgement to those individuals, and you pass by and you quickly kneel at the casket and you get up and you keep going. There is no lingering. It's like a protected zone almost, and one does not go to the front and sit down next to an immediate relative and have a conversation. Just don't do it. And that area is, and what I've always found this interesting because it's sort of a fog almost between that row of the living who are blood relatives and the space and then the casket. And that space in between I've always seen as sort of alive and moving around and very chaotic and filled with energy, almost as if it represents in some way that experience between life and becoming disincarnate, a very visceral, very exacting picture of what that must be like for an individual who's passed through that experience. And it's almost like the forbidden zone, per se. And when you come up to one of the individuals sitting in the front row, you stand by the side and you glance at them, and you don't glance at the casket, you just don't do it, and you wait for one of them to nod to you, and it's essentially permission to come through, and then you show your respect to them first, and then to the body. So I'm thinking about power of heritage now. We talked a bit about power of place, but this power of heritage. And I know that, Chris, you have an extraordinary background. You talked about it a little bit. Tell me how you think that's formed you. That's the kind of magic, the kind of sorcery that you do. I mean, you and I are both very scientific in our own kind of way, and we have a lot that makes sense, that connects to us. But tell us what that heritage has given you.
Well, the one thing that I was able to get was, luckily, I got a free education in it. I mean, it came to me naturally. I was here, and it's all around me. I mean, everywhere you look, you find. I mean, hell, I can go down the road 10 minutes and come to a root shop.
Yeah.
And it's second nature to everybody that was in the family. Like my great grandmother. I mean, she was doing stuff and teaching me things that people don't even notice that it's doing because it's so natural for them to come by. Certain things that you do, and it's there. It's almost like being able to speak English. It's nothing special here because, everybody knows about it. You don't get excited about it, And it came, like I said, to me so naturally. It was like going to school and learning how to do arithmetic. It was just that much available. Now, the Polish side, I had to do a little bit more research about that because nobody wanted to talk about it.
More secretive.
Right.
Yeah.
There was things there, but nobody came straight out and said anything. So I had to do more digging as far as the work goes. And then I had to turn things a little bit different because, I mean, I'm not Christian, so the things that are based in Christianity, I had to turn around to make it fit me and turn it back to myself instead of turning it to somebody else. Take the power back from the spell, not give it away, more or less. So that's how I got into what I do. I mean, I had a wonderful upbringing, like I said, and my grandmother was fantastic, and she told me all these little different bits and pieces, and I just picked up on it naturally because I was around it all the time.
There's being Sicilian. I mean, blood was everywhere. The Sicilian Catholics in the family had all the Jesus icons everywhere with the bleeding head and hold his own heart in his hands, and I've talked about this quite a bit. To us, blood was part of the way that we lived. You said you were blood. That's how we talked about each other. You were either blood or you weren't blood. So I think that the power of heritage is very, very important. However, it doesn't have to lock you to anything, because if you think about it, Italy is not where I want to be. So it's a very interesting thing. I think that one evolves past that which is delivered to them and then becomes an amalgam, in a way, of what it is that we take from these things and how we develop and use this for sorcery. Victor, did you have a question for me?
Sorceress, have you visited any of the Catholic reliquaries in Italy? And if so,
yes.
Being in the presence of the parts of the bodies or bodies of preserved bodies of saints, what was that experience like?
Well, I have, and I've also been to one in New York. There is one in New York that has the bloodied clothing of Pio. So, yes, I actually have. It's an interesting thing because there's so much energy around those items that the items almost become not as relevant. People were so fascinated, and like you had said about Sidonia, there were so many people there having that experience that's part of the experience itself.
Right.
I'm unique to this because I've been around so many thousands of disincarnated and so many thousands of bodies from my work at the medical examiner's office. So I don't have that moment that people have when they're in this excitement over the fact that this is a first-degree relic, and that meaning, of course, according to Catholicism, an actual biological component of the individual who is either sainted or on their way to being sainted. But I will tell you that the mystery around it, the people that buzz around it, I find more interesting than the item itself. Because the item itself is just a biological representation of now, which is a more powerful and more extraordinary being because they're disincarnate. And the people around it can create all sorts of energy. They're praying for things that they want to make happen. They're praying for things that they want to stop. It's very involved. You can see the energy around those items. I don't know if you've ever been around them, but if you're in New York, you can go to John the Baptist because that's where they have one of Pio's socks. And it's in a glass case. It's on view for everyone to see. And whether you accept that he had this experience that they refer to as stigmata or not, it's still this man's blood on his item of clothing, if you accept the pedigree of the piece. And it's quite an interesting thing. You step up to it in an odd way. You're like, oh, what is this? And there's a tremendous amount of energy around it. And it's sitting right there in a glass case. It's a very interesting interaction. I find it to be more about what other people are having in that experience than the item itself. Mary, any thoughts?
So it's the energy of the...
Oh, go ahead, Victor. You were saying?
So it's the energy of devotion and whatever their religious experience is that's creating the environment there.
You know how you had mentioned, Victor, that people often wait for their relatives to leave the room to become disincarnate, to let go?
Yes.
There is almost that. We're talking about an interesting thing tonight. We're talking about the space between the living relatives and the casket. We're talking about the energy of the devoted around these articles. And I was thinking about what you were saying when people sometimes wait till their relatives leave the room to let go. So there's so much of this area that we are free to touch, yet we don't really talk about. It's that space. Because death is an event. It has a time and a place. It has participants. It has witnesses. So it's an event. And I think when we look at these first-degree relics, or when we sit near a casket and we're looking and we know that we are here at this very powerful and important moment, or at the extreme apex of that, when an individual is leaving this physicality to be in another zone, per se, that this is a power of place all its own, a mobile power of place, a power of that energy. Because I think as sorcerers, one of the wonderful things that we do, and I talk about this a lot when I teach, is that we must remember that the place that we are, as Victor said, is, wherever you go, there you are. But there is a sorcery component to that. That we are, when we deal with death and we deal with necromancy, we're sitting with an individual who has had an experience that's right there in front of us, that has its own place. And when we deal with necromancy, we're reaching into and touching that place. Mary, did you have a thought?
Well, I actually had a couple. One of them was just an experience I had, and then one was from the chat room. But, my father passed away recently, and when we were at the wake, to speak to your point, Sorceress, about people being in that line, it was my brother and myself and my mom and then our spouses. And my old neighbor came and sat down next to my mother. And my brother and I, looked at each other, and we let her go on for a minute. And then I looked at my brother again, and he shook his head, and he went over and he just said, "Oh, let me find you a more comfortable space," and helped her up and brought her over to another chair because, as much as we love her, she wasn't going to be in that line. That line was just for us.
Right.
That's so right. It was very interesting. Yeah. No, he said, "Oh, let me bring you over here. Get a more comfortable chair." And he came back over and he shook his head at me. So it was interesting.
Well, we protect the dead. We protect the dead.
Absolutely.
That's what we do. Go ahead.
Absolutely. Yeah, and my father would have rolled his eyes at that too. So, and then in the chat room we were talking about, about power heritage, and one of the things that I've realized that's come up recently is that the evil eye getting passed down through my family. We think it's stopped. One of my aunts we think has it, but she hasn't passed it to anybody else. And we're trying to figure out what's, I'm going to talk to her because I think we finally figured out how it got passed to her, but she doesn't seem to be giving it to anyone else. This is also an aunt that won't tell anyone what her cold cream is. She's 93 years old, so she has such great skin, but she's not passing it, we don't think. And so we're trying to figure out a way to go and ask her about why she's not passing it down, because we can't figure out who in my line and my generation of cousins actually has it. So it's very interesting.
So when you say the evil eye, for our listeners' benefit, are you talking about an experience or an object?
No, it's more of the experience to remove the evil eye.
Right. Okay.
And
the scatamalu is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
You're talking about you're talking about what the Italians call the scatamalu. And this is a very interesting thing because this goes to power of heritage in an amazing way. And, the interesting thing that I discovered is if she doesn't pass it down to you, you can take it when she dies. So there is definitely sorcery for that. And the odd thing is it's one of the very, very first things I learned when I was very young, was how to do that. So these kinds of things, and I'm thinking about what Chris said. And Chris, I cannot wait to sit with you in person, I have to tell you. I cannot wait to get you in front of me and do work hands-on with each other because I think it's going to be extraordinary. I want to talk to your grandmother, by the way. I want to get to know her because she has stuff to tell you, and that's very important. So
Which one?
The one that you said you're not sure specifically about her gypsy heritage. So we want to get some information there. But I think that there's so much between the four of us. There's such a varied, enormous amount of heritage, and yet it's brought us all to this topic. So are there heritages, and I think I'm going to ask Victor this question because I know we're sort of running out of time, but Victor, as an interfaith minister, you meet a lot of people in their moment of true need. Are there heritages in which this kind of thing is more visceral and emotional, more so than others?
Oh, absolutely. If you look at people who are devout Catholics or Orthodox Jews, the attendant to, as you mentioned, in terms of the Italian families and Jewish families and Irish families to a certain extent, the amount of attention that's paid to the transition is phenomenal. And again, my experience has been in working with people in hospice, not so much with Orthodox Jewish families, but with Italian and Irish families, and some Latin families also. The need to hold on to the person and not let them die is just amazing. The amount of energy that's extended to hold on to these people.
Yes, that's very, very true. I can agree with you there. The professional Italian mourners, and I don't say that lightly because we did have them. Maybe not as much now, or maybe there's even a resurgence of it now, and there wasn't for a long time, but I remember professional mourners who would come in the black veil and wail. And, when you don't know what that is and you enter it, it's pretty phenomenal. I would, go to wakes, and if I had someone with me who wasn't Sicilian or didn't know how that worked, they would see these 3 or 4 women completely dressed in black, although in my culture that's pretty much the only color that's available. And they would have a long sort of tulle thing over their face to the ground, their veil, and, saying, "Bring him back to me," and all this wailing would go on. And it is really a cathartic sideshow, and I don't mean that in a negative way. It allows for sorrow to be in the space in just the right place.
Yeah.
And that kind of power of heritage is so useful, because when you grow up in that kind of thing, you know that you are allowed to stop being sorrowful for a moment and stay in your life.
Yeah.
And this kind of thing is offered. It's a very, if some cultures are very dry, then this one is soaking wet. And I remember, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead, please.
No. Go ahead, Victor. I've talked enough. I want to hear what you have to say.
I've got one more piece of heritage business that just happened for me this past weekend. My mom is 83 and she's not well. And it's interesting that when she was younger, she and I would talk. I'd broach subjects of spirituality and energy and such, and she would sort of poo-poo things. And while I'm sitting with her on Sunday, just to preface this, she has COPD very badly. She has Parkinson's disease, and she also has early onset Alzheimer's. Mm-hmm. And she's had a tough life, and a lot of this is resultant in that. But she says to me, she's looking at me, and she says, "No one in our family history on either side has ever had Parkinson's disease. Why am I having Parkinson's disease?" And I broached the subject, and I felt comfortable doing so, that my brother, my sister, and I each have an autoimmune condition, totally different from each other, that is indicative of a genetic mutation. And my mother's Parkinson's is also indicative of a genetic mutation. I said to my mother, there are some who believe that those who have had contact, and I know it's a miserable role, but with extraterrestrial beings, have had this experience of having genetic mutations in families. And my mother goes, "Oh, that explains what happened when you were about a year old and the orange light came through the kitchen window." And I almost dropped dead when she said that. I immediately pulled out my iPhone, set it on record, and I said, "Just repeat everything you just said to me." And in a matter of about 10 or 12 minutes, she related the story. I was about a year old. She got up at 2 o'clock in the morning to get me a bottle, and she said this orange light came through the window. She was so tired, she said she didn't pay attention to it, but it illuminated the entire room for about 5 minutes, and then it went away. And she doesn't remember anything else about it. But this is something that she had never shared with me. And I think it's really important. And she also shared one other thing, that when my dad was having surgery at one time, she was in the waiting room while he was having surgery, and she had basically an out-of-body experience where her consciousness shifted to the corner of the room, and she was looking down upon herself and sort of caring for herself simultaneously. And again, these are things she never told me years ago. So what I'm suggesting is, if anyone has any interest or anything in your family, it doesn't have to be this type of work. And when you have elderly parents and parents who are getting on and perhaps near transition, take a recorder and sit down and talk to them and just start recording your family history. Heritage is so important, and sometimes we don't get it until it's too late.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so true. That's the American culture, is to not necessarily grasp a hold of the elderly, if you want to use that word, the wise ones, and take every bit from them. We tuck them away because they're inconvenient, as opposed to what really needs to be done, which is grasping every bit of time and moment and energy with them in any way possible. And that is, what you just gave some people a gift, Victor. A gift that nobody else will ever be able to give them, by saying that, because somebody's going to listen to this. If not tonight, then in archive at some moment, and they're going to say, "I didn't think of that." So you might have just given a whole generation some information that they might not have had any other way. And I'm really honoring you and feeling grateful for that. That was tremendous. Thank you for that.
This is what all of us collectively, thank you, this is what all of us collectively are supposed to do. gain the knowledge in whatever way it comes and pass it on for them to use or not use as they choose.
That's right. I've heard so many times, I can't tell you how many times, from people who are, in my opinion, posing in this work and not living this work and saying, you shouldn't be teaching, you shouldn't be telling people how to do this. And I always say it every single time I start teaching, I say it in almost every class, if you get better at it, I don't get worse. If you get better at it, then everything gets better. If the people around me are living a life using sorcery or whatever information I can offer them, then everybody gets paid in the bigger picture. And this kind of wisdom and knowledge. I think about, I've written 13 books, and most of them on sorcery, but not all of them. Some of them are fiction, which I guess is the same kind of thing because they're all based in sorcery. And I say sometimes, I wonder if I've contributed enough, and my daughter laughs at me when I say that. But legacy here is very important to me. I have a real passion/obsession agreement to write down as much of this sorcery work that I possibly can and make it available indefinitely in the best formats that I can, so that people with much more talent than me and much more, I guess, youth and willing to start at the beginning can take it and run with it because the work stands on its own. And I know we only have a few minutes. I just want to say a couple of things before we go out. We will stay in this time slot for a couple of weeks, and I want to do some arranging and add some things to the show. And tonight's show was great. It was super amazing, I have to say. I thank all of you. This was a great show tonight. Maybe it was the subject, I don't know, maybe it was the right alignment of interest, but this was a great show tonight, and I'm very grateful to everybody who wants to be part of it. And I want to say that the studio is coming along. It will there will be more information. There will be an email. There will be a thing on Facebook as we move forward. But that at the end of the day, the most important thing that I can say is that I am honored on an extraordinary level to be able to work with the disincarnate and to be able to travel and to be part of the understanding of power, place, and heritage and all of this business. And we just contact me if you have any questions. If you're interested in the work, just forget all the websites. Do whatever you want. sorceresscagliastro@gmail.com. I want to talk to people. I already have too many people that I'm talking to, but I want to talk to people and I want to share the information. Thank you all. Mary, take us out.
Well, thank you for listening to tonight's show and this week's edition of the Dark Matters radio show with the Sorceress Cagliastro. To reach the Sorceress, you can reach her by her email address at sorceresscagliastro@gmail.com or her website at cagliastrotheironring.com. Chris Rogue Ostrowski can be reached at his email at hellsrogue, HELSrogue@gmail.com. And me, Shotgun Mary, can be reached at theshotgunmary@gmail.com. And you can reach Victor Furman at his fan page on Facebook, Victor the Voice Furman. And please follow us on Facebook at the Dark Matters Radio Show with the Sorceress Cagliastro. Join us again next week when our topic will be containment, which will feature a discussion on objects containing demons for personal use and sorcery. Good night, everyone.
Thank you, Mary. Good night.
Good night.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.